Alright everyone, this video is sort of a companion to the Tulsi Gabbard video yesterday because it fits in with the same basic idea, and that's this. I'm declaring Joe Biden to be the presumptive Democratic nominee at this time. I'm officially coming out and giving my prediction that Joe Biden will definitely be nominated. I base that on a plethora of things. Number one is simply the delegate count. If you look at it, I think Joe Biden's lead is more or less insurmountable. Number two, people have already begun acting as though he is the nominee. Have you noticed that? There's been a subtle switch since the last slew of primaries in reporting, and this is not just legacy media, PAB or anything like that. This is also the independent media, including myself. Joe Biden has essentially clinched it, I think, in people's minds almost as much as in political reality. This, basically, the deal gets sealed with Gabbard because the final person other than Bernie Sanders, who hasn't hit 40 yet in a national poll and presumably won't. The final person drops out and endorses Biden now. Tulsi Gabbard's fans, I think, will split 50-50 between Biden and Sanders. She was at like 2-3% in the polls, so basically not many people. I don't think it gives Biden any specific boost. It's more, there's no longer any fluidity in the field. There are only two candidates left. It is now officially a two-man matchup. And while neither of them are strong candidates, one of them is clearly less weak. While neither of them are healthy or young, one of them is a couple of years younger and slightly healthier, at least in the contemporary sense. While neither of them, personality-wise, really holds a candle to Trump, Joe Biden at least is more likable. And that goes quite some distance when you're within politics, being able to connect with people and be likable. The problem is Bernie Sanders connects with people in the platform sense, but he only connects with a minority of Democrats. Out of all of the most recent primaries, you've had 9 primaries recently. Bernie Sanders won one of them. It happens to be the state with the lowest delegate count out of those states. Every other state, Joe Biden won. He won 5 in the prior primary, and in the most recent, he won all 3. He would have won a 4th, but Ohio decided to delay till June, which, by the way, I think is ridiculous, delaying primaries because of, people having a disease. You can't simply interrupt your civic function forever. At some point, it becomes a little bit suspicious when you start doing that. I'm sure that the Western governments understand this and hopefully will take countermeasures. Joe Biden almost can't be beat because he's got his aura of inevitability. That's number one. His opponent, I think, and this is just my opinion based on, sort of long-term polling trends, I believe has a low ceiling, specifically because he uses the term socialist to describe himself. The problem is that more than half of U.S. voters and a significant minority, at least, of Democrats are turned off by that term. Even among Democratic voters, if you look at the over 40 demographic, they disapprove of socialism too. Only the youngest Democratic blocs, only the sort of 18 to mid-30s demographic, specifically under the Dem banner, approve of socialism more than capitalism. It's a very small proportion of the population. The problem is that that's basically Bernie Sanders' only voting bloc. Among Democrats and left-leaning independents who are under 35 or so, Bernie Sanders has the lead. The problem is that group is one of the least likely groups to actually go to the polls. They're likely to knock on your door, and they're likely to chip in $5 to stop the malarkey or something, or to stop shenanigans. Bernie should have made his own slogan mocking Joe Biden's. That would have at least been humorous. But he doesn't have a sense of humor, so it's a big problem. But they're not likely to show up on voting day, whether it's a primary or a general. The problem is, and here's the other problem. The problem is Bernie Sanders has simply been too far left all along. In fact, he went further left than he was initially. He totally sold out on both the border and on guns. The only two platforms that he's changed his mind on over the last election, because he's remarkably consistent throughout time, since the 1970s actually, very consistent. He went further left on guns because he initially was like, well, I don't think we need any additional gun control. I'm from the state of Vermont. We don't really have gun control and things are fine. He went far left on that. He decided, well, yeah, we should have magazine restrictions. We should have licensing. We should have age bans. We should have assault weapon. He basically adopted, the platform of George Soros. And on borders, because 10 years ago, if you listen to Bernie Sanders, he's like, well, open borders. hurt American workers and drive wages down and cause unemployment, and we need to protect our workers. Very unionist. Now he's abandoned that too, and he says, well, no, you're a bigot and a xenophobe if you believe that, essentially. Because it became unpopular to have, common sense views on workers' rights within U.S. politics. Bernie Sanders, ironically, is attempting, and it's not just him, even people like Pelosi are kind of doing this. They're trying to take Biden's success and piss it away by moving him further left for a general. Normally, here's the general consensus. Candidates usually move to the right or to the left, depending on which block they're trying to wine and dine, during a primary to outmaneuver their opponents while looking sane. This is what Bernie failed at. He went too far out there. Some others did as well. He went total AOC mode. They then move back for the general and temper their platform. And what they do is they artificially limit the number of things they talk about in the primary to those issues in which they lean further to that side. Then they start talking about other issues that they have more in common with the general public during the general. Trump did this. Hillary Clinton did this. Pretty much any successful candidate does this, and some of the unsuccessful ones. What they're trying to do with Biden instead is he moved into the moderate lane for the primaries, won anyway, because it was a packed field and because the alternatives are all very weak. Now they're trying to get him to move to the left. Oh, Biden, why don't you take up universal health care, you sellout? Why don't you take up UBI? Why don't you take up borders are racist and stuff like this? If he does that, if he listens to the burnouts, to the Bernie babies, the AOC types, he's going to lose. That would be a foregone conclusion. Yeah, there's no possible way. Joe Biden's going to have enough problems as a moderate candidate simply because, again, the economy by and large is still moving along fairly well. It's shuddering at the moment, but it's largely, it's a stock sell-off. Of course, they could rally for a week straight and remake those gains in the better part of a week. That's definitely a possibility. It depends on what happens with coronavirus and with the stimulus and certain other aspects of our financial character as a nation. By and large, though, Trump is still reigning over a largely successful economy and a largely successful diplomatic sort of situation. For the most part, it's generally peaceable. Biden will have enough problems, and they're trying to move him to the left. But he is the presumptive nominee. The presumption is this. If you're 200-300 delegates ahead, reasonably late in the game, your opponent has not shown a proclivity towards gaining traction in most parts of the country that still have significant numbers of delegates to allocate. That's number 2. And the cat was trying to type here for a second. And if your opponent uses a term that essentially precludes independent voters from breaking for him, which is socialism, the presumption is that Joe Biden will be nominee. Now, will he be a strong candidate? No. I've said all along, while he's probably going to get it, and I said this many, many months ago, he's also probably going to lose. He's a weak candidate, but he is less weak. And what the Democrats have done isn't cheat Bernie Sanders. They've protected their party from implosion, because they know that if Bernie Sanders, a near 80-year-old man with heart problems who calls himself a fucking socialist, became the Dem nominee, he would lose in a landslide. They're hoping that Biden at the very least doesn't lose in a landslide. They're hoping he comes close-ish like Hillary did, or the map looks a little bit like, like a 2004 sort of thing. I don't know if he'll be able to pull that off, but I know that Bernie wouldn't be able to. So congratulations to the Democratic Party. At the very least, you have probably staved off your complete implosion. Now you should lose by a spectacular margin anyway, though, because the hope should be, and if the far leftists want to accomplish something, they can get this done by not voting for Joe Biden. If the party loses by a large enough margin, it'll force the ousting of people like Perez and Pelosi that really led to this problem. The problem of having the massively far-left fanatic fringe trying to somehow coexist with a bunch of center-right moderates within the Dem Party, that was manufactured by the policies of neoliberals over the course of the last few decades, trying to promise things to younger voters and never delivering on them. The problem is people got wise to it because the internet exists, and we could point out the discrepancies between what Hillary said she wanted and what she delivered, what Obama wanted and what he delivered. I see more and more Democrats turning their back on Obama's legacy, too. This could hurt Biden as well. The fact that Obama is literally labeled by some of these people as nothing more than a corporate sellout at this point. He was the Messiah. He was the chosen one. Oh, no, actually, he loved corporations. He's a neoliberal. It's actually hilarious to watch this. And I think he's one of the most highly rated Dem presidents. I think he's like third or fourth or something. Because you got FDR. They worship him for no reason. He prolonged the Depression. He loved poor people, so he made more of them. And then you have JFK, and usually Obama, I think, is right after. They used to be Clinton. Clinton used to be ahead of Obama, but then they Me Too'd him out of the limelight and shoved him aside as a sort of a dirty joke from the 1990s. Very funny. So Joe Biden will probably be nominated. There's like a 99% chance. When that happens, I expect he'll lose. I expect it'll be a very funny election. But at least he won't lose, I think, by the kind of massive margins that a socialist would lose by. Because I can just imagine every, Cuban exile in Florida coming out to knock on doors 24/7 and how hard that would hit him in a state that's, one of the most competitive. I think that would tip the scales, honestly. If Bernie were the nominee, I would expect him to do more poorly than Hillary did by a considerable margin. That's about all. Peace out.